everybody, and welcome back to the Finding Wendy podcast. Well, today we're going to dive deep into stories of wellness, transformation, and resilience. My name is Wendy Limbertie, and I'm here with my fabulous co-host, Alison Pizanie. And we have an incredibly inspiring guest joining us, the most famous person in our lives right now, Miss Jen Stevens, author of the groundbreaking book Cleanish and many other books, and New York Times best-selling book, of course, Fast Feast Repeat, and Delay Don't Deny, and I can't even keep track of all of the names. Jen, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm so glad to be here today. Good to talk to both of y'all.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking today about the book Cleanish, and there's Alison holding up the book there, and Alison, go.
Well, we have to get the subtitle in there because the subtitle of the book is to eat mostly clean, live mainly clean, and unlock your natural's ability to self-clean.
Unlock your body's natural ability to self-clean. Yeah.
And we're just so curious, what inspired you to write the book? Where did you get the idea? And how did you decide to actually go forward with it?
Well, that is a great question. And, after I wrote Fast Feast Repeat, and it was a New York Times bestseller, my literary agent and my editor, they're like, all right, what's the next intermittent fasting book you're going to write? I'm like, nope, I've already written that. I've already written the intermittent fasting book. It was Fast Feast Repeat. And so I was like, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to write yet, but they're like, well, we want you to write something. So I'm like, well, let me think about it. What needs to be said? And, I've been managing intermittent fasting support communities for a long time. I opened my first Facebook intermittent fasting support group in 2015. I left Facebook in 2021 and took my communities off of Facebook. But over the years of managing intermittent fasting support groups, I found that we all had a pretty normal progression. We might start because, we're attracted to intermittent fasting because we're so tired of counting calories, counting macros, trying diets, restricting what we're eating. So many of us, myself included, when I started intermittent fasting, I was like, I'm never going to restrict what I'm eating ever again. I'm never going to diet ever again. I'm just going to eat whatever I want to eat in my eating window. And then a funny thing happens over time. Over time, our body starts to direct us towards better choices. I started to crave more vegetables. I started not wanting to eat fried foods and fast food and, all the things that used to be what I thought I would eat all the time. If I could just eat whatever I wanted, I thought it would be McDonald's and, Starbucks. And then it turns out it isn't. So I started gravitating to healthier choices. And you really get on the track of, why am I living this lifestyle? And you feel so much better. And then you start to think, what else could I do? And, you start choosing, organic foods perhaps, or you're looking for higher quality things. Then you realize, like so many of us realize, there really are a lot of chemicals in our cleaning products and our beauty products. And then, you kind of snowballs. And, I like to say knowledge is power, but the flip side of that is ignorance is bliss, right? Prior to really understanding the chemicals that are in our foods, the chemicals that are in our beauty products, our shampoo, the chemicals that are in our, the things we clean our house with, I was on the ignorance is bliss life of that. And then the more I started to learn, the more I realized, the more I understood, we really don't want a laundry detergent that makes our clothing smell fresh and clean all day, because those are harmful chemicals we're inhaling and they're doing all sorts of things in our bodies. And so that's when you get to the knowledge is power side of things. And then I was like, I know what I want to write. And so I pitched the idea of this book to my agent, to my editor, and they liked the idea. It builds on intermittent fasting in a way, the unlock your body's natural ability to self-clean, right? Our bodies are great at self-cleaning when we lower our toxic load, do certain things. Intermittent fasting is one of those strategies for self-cleaning. So I wanted to figure out a way to get it across in a you don't have to be perfect kind of approach, and also really empowering the reader to make the choices that would be most impactful, and also start what's easy for you. Like, as I talk in Cleanish, clean deodorant, that was not the easiest thing for me. I've now found one. We could talk about that later, but you start where you're ready, and you're not changing everything at once, and you're coming from the knowledge is power perspective, but not that I need to throw away everything in my house and start over, because
Yeah.
that's not doable. So I
And
hope that helps.
yeah, it does. It does certainly help. And just before we started this podcast, we were actually having a conversation about birthdays and signs and things like that. And I just wanted to connect this sort of point when you were talking about sharing the education, sharing your knowledge about the research that you've done to put this book out there. As it turns out, Jen and I share exactly the same birthday.
We're birthday twins.
We're birthday twins.
Yeah.
July 23rd.
Yeah.
And we're both Leos.
Mm-hmm.
And so Leos are leaders. Leaders want leaders, and they want to share. They want to help organize. They want to help get the word out.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why I started my own podcast, like you started your podcast, like you wrote your books, we are educators. Alison's also an educator, but she's an Aquarius, but she has a great connection to a Leo. Her son also shares July 23rd.
Love it.
And the love of my life, my new dog, Winnie, also July 23rd. So we're surrounded with people that are leaders, organizers, educators. And the thing about your book, Cleanish, it was, as I mentioned before, we started recording this, it was like, or I don't even remember when I said it, but it was like an academic novel for me, kind of similar to Dr. Jason Fung's book, that I had to take copious notes and read it many times, because there was a lot of statistics and a lot of stuff that, a lot of people will skim over, but I didn't skim over because we are talking about the book today. So I have to do my homework. And but the interesting thing is, this book is out there, and you're the first part of your book, you're starting about the cleaning products, the clothes that you wear. Speaking of clothes that you wear, I am wearing Cleanish clothes because I'm wearing a cotton shirt and a wool sweater. This is the very first time I've ever bought a wool sweater. I thought because I always thought it was really itchy for me, but it turns out it's not bad. So it's from Roots Canada, and it's really warm and comfortable. And so taking that information and talking about the first part of the book, where you talk about cleaning products, you talk about clothing, you talk about the skincare products that you use,
and what we're eating. Food is important.
No, that food. I was going to talk about the food section next after the first shift. So I just first wanted to talk about the cleaning section, because I found that very interesting.
To live mostly clean. Yeah.
Yeah, to live mostly clean, because it's just like, okay, so for myself, I use very expensive products on my body, and I because my mom showed us all, if you want to look good, you have to use expensive products, and I'm assuming these expensive products also do not have as much chemical stuff in it as other cheaper products. Go, tell us.
You cannot assume that. Absolutely not. And that's really why it's so important. There's a concept called greenwashing that I talk about in Cleanish. And greenwashing is when products have a sheen of being better, and like little things they do on the label. Like if they put a green leaf on the label, you're like, ooh, that's a healthy choice. I mean, just literally a graphic makes you think it's healthy, or like a picture of a bunny, so we think something. Or if they just say pure and natural, well, you know what else is pure and natural? Arsenic, right? That's not good for you. Just because something is natural or pure or has a green leaf on it doesn't mean it's good for you. And also, just because something is more expensive that doesn't mean that it's better. I tell this story in Cleanish, when I really started looking at my cleaning products, there's an app that I was really using at the time made by the Environmental Working Group. And it's an app where you can check your products, and they have things categorized by like dish soap, for example. Like you can just look in there and see rankings of dish soap. And they rank them with what's verified, which is everything in here is safe, and then things can have like an A or a B or a C or a 1 or a 2 or a 3 depending on the category, green or yellow or red. And so I pulled out some of the products in my home, and as people are reading Cleanish, by the way, there's a section at the end of every chapter for you to do some things like get this app and go through the products and see what you've got and write some stuff down. So that's the school teacher in me. Cleanish is not just here's the information, go. It's here's the information. Now, how are you going to apply this to your own life? So as I was going through the stuff in my, under my sinks, right, under my home, things that I was using, I realized just how greenwashed I had been. There was a certain brand, I won't mention the brand, but it was a brand of cleaning products that we've all been, it feels very green and clean and a little more expensive. And I looked, and it did not have a very high rating at all, the one that I actually had. And so I looked in that category, and what was hilarious is that Dawn dish soap, the blue stuff, was rated higher than the one that I had been buying thinking it was safer. Like I was like, yo, Dawn, it's blue. We don't want that. And it would have been a better choice than the one that I had bought. Now, there's actually better choices than Dawn that you can buy as well. So instead, I just looked and I'm like, oh, okay, here's a great brand. It's cleaner. Oh, and it has a similar scent to the one I was using that I like. Not all scents are bad for you. We want scents with like essential oils, for example, versus certain fragrances that can have all sorts of weird things in them. So it was easy. And you don't have to go under your counter and under your cabinet and throw it all away. You can say, all right, I'm just going to use the rest of this up. And when I replace it, I'll buy something better. And that's the ish part. I'm not like scared to wash my hands with soap at somebody else's house who might not be using a clean option. That's not going to be a big deal. It's what you do most of the time that matters. What I have at my house makes a difference. Like I've got one of those little pump things is built into my sink, and it connects under the sink to a really good quality brand of dish soap, and I use that to wash my hands. I'm at home. That's what I'm exposed to most of the time. When I'm traveling and I'm in an airport, Lord knows what's in that sink. It's probably not very clean, but it's okay. You don't have to obsess about it. It's what you do most of the time that matters. Uh-oh, Wendy, I can't hear you. You're on mute.
I put myself on mute because my dog was barking,
Yeah.
and I don't, the moment, sorry about that, that's the most common mistake that people make in Zoom is to start talking when they're in mute mode. So I did it too.
That's all right.
I was just looking at your, and the wonderful thing about this book, Cleanish, like you said, you're an educator, you're a teacher. So guess what, ladies and gentlemen, this book comes with a workbook. So the workbook you can
Well, it's
find.
in there with it. It's the work. If you buy the paperback, it's in there. Like you're just working through the workbook. If you buy the Audible version, there's a PDF that you can
download, which I've done. Yeah. So I've downloaded the PDF, which is also available to find on your website, JinStevens.
.com/Cleanish.
Yep. /Cleanish. And so I went ahead and looked up the actual website of, or the app where you talk about the EWG guides.
Yep.
And if you don't want to download the app or whatever, you can also just go to the web page to look up your products and get more information. It's ewg.org, and then the Healthy Home Guide. So that is a great resource. Again, thank you so much for doing all of this research and putting this all into a book for us lazy people that don't know how to find this information.
Well, I have an even better app that I would like to share if it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And it's because the thing about EWG is fantastic. And again, when I'm sitting at home and trying to figure out, what I might want to buy in a certain category, they have the categories that I can go to and look. But when you're in your local store, there's so many things on the shelf and they might not be rated by EWG. So like you can scan their barcode or whatever, and it might not pop up. So there's an app that I didn't find until after I had written Cleanish, and a friend of mine actually told me about it. It's called Switch Naturals, I think is the name of it, Switch Naturals, and I'm not sponsored by them or anything like that. It's just a really good app. You have to pay for it. I don't pay for a lot of apps, but that's one I paid for. And Switch Naturals allows you to go to a list of ingredients on any product in any store. And you just use your your camera of your phone, and you just scan the ingredients list of anything, and then it tells you what might be harmful. Like I found this to be really helpful. I was just in Florida.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great. I was just in Florida last summer in August, and I have realized my skin breaks out when I use mineral-based sunscreens every time. And I'm in Florida, and so I'm out in the sun. I don't want to burn because I'm pretty fair. So I was using my mineral-based sunscreens a lot, and I got like terrible, terrible zits from it. And I'm like, I just cannot use a mineral-based. That's the cleanest option. The cleanest option, mineral-based sunscreens. My skin hates them. It clogs me up, I guess. So I was like, I'm going to have to go find something else or my face is a mess. Yeah. So I went to, the regular store where they're selling other things and was shocked that I'm just going to say the name brand, Banana Boat sunscreen rated pretty high. And it was not a bad choice, but I'm scanning the ingredients. And so I'm like, well, okay, this is the best choice that's available to me here where I am. And that's how I live my Cleanish life.
Yeah.
With drawbacks, ideally a mineral-based sunscreen, but my skin hates those. So I'm like, all right, what is here in Florida where I am that's going to be the best choice? And I use my Switch Naturals app. I scan it and I'm like, oh, this is really not a terrible choice. And those things will just surprise you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think it's super, super interesting and super important that you included a whole section on Cleanish products in your house. Just for our listeners, all three of us are practicing intermittent fasting. I'm now closing into my 6th month of intermittent fasting. It's been a bit of an up and down roller coaster kind of ride, but everything seems to be going back to the original. Well, tomorrow I'm back on my fasting, so it'll be fine. And why am I saying this is because I wanted to talk a little bit more now about the actual food section of the book. And I haven't heard anything from Alison, and she's still there, ladies and gentlemen. She's still there. She looks beautiful if you're watching the video. But Alison, why don't you take the next section and start us off with the next section?
Yeah, so we're all, trying to find balance in our life. And you talk a lot in your book about the rise in obesity and ultra-processed foods and how they play a role in that. And can you just talk a little bit about the connection between these foods that are so pervasive, unfortunately, in our, in our food stores and the health crisis that we're facing?
It's such a broad topic. I could probably talk for 5 hours just about that, and how what we're eating sets us up for obesity. And then it's multifaceted. It's not just one part of it. Like I talk about in Cleanish, there's a study that was done where the researcher, Kevin Hall is his name. He's one of my favorite scientific researchers out there. I love the work that he does. Other people might like celebrities. I like researchers, research health and nutrition topics. I actually have a list of my favorite researchers, but he's one of them. And what I love about the study, particularly that Kevin Hall did about ultra-processed foods, is that he had, when you are doing scientific research, if you think back to like elementary school science projects, I have a master's degree in science education. I ran the school science fair for a while. And, you come up with a hypothesis, then you test your hypothesis, right? And surprise, surprise, most of the time, whatever your hypothesis is, that's what you end up finding. And so that's what happens most of the time in science research. They think this is going to happen, and then, oh, shock, it's what happens. Well, in this study about ultra-processed foods, Kevin Hall actually thought it wouldn't matter. Before he did the research, now I've seen him talk about this, it's how I know this about him, but he thought that, we've all been taught calories in, calories out, right? And that you just eat less, move more. It's really easy. Maybe macros have something to do with it. But Kevin Hall thought that as long as people are eating, the same amount of calories, the same macros, whatever, you'll have similar outcomes. He did not think that whether foods were ultra processed or not would make a difference. So he set up a study where people were living in I think metabolic wards, what they call it, and they provided them with food, and the researchers were able to see how much people ate. So in part of the study, they were given ultra processed foods and able to eat just as much as they wanted, stop when you've had enough. And then they were able to measure how much the people were eating. And then in the other, they would flip, and then those people would be eating real foods. And they tried to match it up so that they were offered a similar number of calories. They were offered meals with a similar macro profile, like proteins, fats, and carbs. So they, kept what they offered them the same, and just see what the people did with it. Now, if all that mattered was how many calories we consumed, or what the macronutrient ratio was of those calories, then would have been the same, right? No difference. Well, what they found surprised Kevin Hall and the researchers. They found that when they were presented with the ultra-processed foods, the people ate an average of 500 extra calories a day.
Yep.
And that was not what they expected to find. And those people gained weight because they were eating more.
Yep.
Why is that? Well, we could talk about why, many, many reasons why. Satiety is affected, and that's your body's your body telling you you've had enough. When you're eating the ultra processed foods, your body doesn't recognize them the same way. Like, I like to think about it like, let's imagine we had a bag of potato chips and we had baked potatoes. And let's imagine we look at, the calories in that bag of potato chips, those fried, crispy potato chips. We see how much fat is in there from being fried. And then we match that up with baked potatoes and add enough butter and sour cream so that they have exactly the same number of calories, exactly the same carbohydrate count, exactly the same fat profile, whatever, exactly the same. Now you just start eating them. Which is going to make you feel really full and satisfied when you're done? It isn't going to be the bag of potato chips.
No.
Probably each of us has had an experience in our life where we have eaten an entire bag of something crunchy and salty and fatty.
I'm fair to say I had it actually recently.
I have done it. I have no off switch when it comes to those crunchy, salty things in bags.
What is your favorite chip?
Well,
I'm just going to go
Doritos.
You always talk about Doritos in your.
They light my brain up. I can't help it. I love them. Even now when I've got the even now when I know that they're not the best for my body. So what I do is I just don't buy those, right?
Yeah. My favorite chip is Lay's sour cream and onion.
Yeah.
I'm a Doritos girl. Mm-hmm.
But
you're a Doritos girl?
I'll buy a small serving of still ultra processed, but an organic, like Pirate Booty or something. I don't know.
Okay.
But anyway, if we go back to that example, you could only put in so much baked potato with butter and sour cream before your stomach would feel really full. And that has to do with a lot of things like your stretch receptors in your body, for example. Like,
well, we call the chips a slider food in the bariatric world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They are sliders. So you totally get it. Ultra processed foods are slider foods. Protein shakes, for example. That's another example. People will say, oh, I heard we need to eat more protein, and I'm going to start having protein shakes to supplement my needs. I'm like, I would not do that. That probably y'all call protein shakes a slider food too, right? I would have a feeling. I've never had bariatric surgery, but you could just keep putting down, and they're ultra processed, and your body doesn't get the same I'm full signals. Like, I had a big baked potato this past week full of butter and sour cream, and I was so full. in a great way. My body had a lot of nutrients because the peel of the potato has a lot of nutrients. The potato itself has a lot of nutrients. There's a lot of good stuff in that potato.
And
So
and
even though
yeah,
it's the same calories, macros, whatever,
that is
body
super
perceives
interesting,
it
Jen.
differently. It's so interesting.
It's
Yeah.
so so does that also count for French fries? Because French fries is a little bit more dense,
Yeah.
but the process of like, okay, so if you were to cut up a potato and fry
Mhm.
it in oil, as opposed to buying the bag of pre-made French fries and putting that in your oven or your deep fryer. So the pre-made French fries have all these ultra-processed chemicals. So that's exactly the same hypothesis that you're talking about. You would not feel full. You will not feel as full when you're buying the processed frozen French fry version as opposed to making your own French fries
I
at
think
home.
I think so. And you really, start to do these experiments yourself and you can really feel a difference. You don't have to feel deprived, right? If you eat an entire bag of potato chips, you're going to not feel very good physically. You feel ugh, because that your body's like ugh. But then you're also surprisingly still hungry.
Mhm.
Because our bodies are not searching for calories, they're searching for nutrients. But what I find I love, I do love French fries, but a lot of restaurant fries, I can't eat them. They make my stomach hurt. Well, not a lot, but there are a few. Like I live here on the coast, and there's a restaurant that has a beautiful view. It's on the ocean. They have great burgers. Their fries make my stomach hurt. I can't eat fries from that restaurant. But at home, I can buy potatoes. I can cut them up. I can toss them in organic olive oil. I can roast them in the oven. One little trick I've found when you're trying to get your potatoes really to have a great consistency, boil them, like cut them up, boil them till they're a little more tender than just raw, and then drain them, dry them off, toss them in the olive oil, roast them. So they're going to be a little more tender, but get the crispiness on the outside. Just make a
So
Mm,
really,
very
you don't deep
tasty.
fry. You don't deep fry at
oh
all.
no, oh, I don't. It's a big pain in the neck. What are you going to do with all that oil?
This and the smell of the oil lingers around in your
Yeah,
house.
I mean, then you got all this
So
oil and you can't
yeah.
really store it. Oil
So
goes
on
rancid. So no, I don't deep fry at home. I do a lot of roasting.
yeah. So on the topic of ultra processed foods and
Yeah.
chips, um, what blew me away in this whole section at the beginning, first of all, this wonderful study is a fantastic, eye-opening thing. But for me, as a Canadian, because we're not run by the American government yet, um, the section called "Food Glorious Food"
Hmm.
on page 88, you start talking about government-funded agriculture.
Oh yeah.
So that this was for me one of those what
Hmm.
that the problem with commodity crops.
Yeah.
So I understand, the story goes, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but the American government started buying up excess commodity crops like wheat, corn, soybean
Hmm.
from the farmers to help boost the agricultural industry and help the farmers. But the problem with these commodity crops is that the government had too much. What are
Yeah.
we going to do with it? So the reason why they have commodity crops or where the government got involved was to control the prices for
Hmm.
what the farmers received, but they had to start storing all of this food long term. And so what happened to these crops, these wherever they're stored in some place in America, and what happened and how did this affect our the huge industry of ultra processed food?
Yeah. Well,
Tell us all about it, Jen.
there's always unintended consequences from every really good idea, right? Like, here's just an example as a teacher. One of the states lowered class size dramatically. This is a long time ago. Like they lowered class size dramatically because doesn't that sound like a good thing, right? You're going to lower class size. What could be wrong with that? Students you'll have a smaller class, a teacher. Well, the unintended consequence was they didn't have enough teachers, so they had to start hiring people who were not qualified. And so the teachers were not as good. So you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. So, like, everything that starts off as a great idea ends up with unintended consequences. And, commodity crops is just one example of that. Let's help our farmers. Let's support our farmers when they're growing. We gotta have farmers. We have to have people growing the food. And so now we ended up with all this extra corn because we're paying them extra for the corn. So obviously, if you're paying me extra for corn, I'm gonna double down on corn and grow a lot of corn because you're not paying me extra for carrots.
Right.
You're paying me for corn, right?
Yeah.
So then we end up with all this, and that's how corn syrup was born. All of a sudden, everybody's growing all this corn. We got to do something with it. Well, guess what? Corn syrup sweetens things in a way that the American palate really likes. And also, it's cheaper than cane sugar. Win-win. They're making all this corn syrup, and it's cheaper, and it's in everything. And also, that goes back into now it's more ultra processed. And now it affects our bodies and the way that our whole system is working because we're having all this unnatural corn syrup. And then there's also the factor of, with all these commodity crops, we want to have a good yield. Before modern agriculture, a bad growing season, you could have a pestilence or something, something happens, wipe out your whole crop. So now they've come up with all these, herbicides and chemicals that they're Roundup is just, one example, glyphosate. We've probably all heard of that. And, they spray it on everything. And these genetically modified crops are Roundup ready. So the crops survive, but the weeds are killed. And so we're like, yeah, this is great because our yield is higher. We need to have good yield, which is true. We do want the crops to have a lot of yield, but now we have another unintended consequence. And so, like, one example of why that, some people are like, oh, it's no big deal. There's no problem. Those are safe. One thing we hear anecdotally from a lot of people is, they think that they can't eat gluten. Gluten bothers them. They're sensitive to gluten, and that would be like American wheat. They cannot eat American wheat without having problems. But they go to Europe where they do not use glyphosate. It's not allowed there. And they're able to eat all the European wheat that they want. They don't have the same problems. So a lot of people, I think, who think that they have problems with wheat, actually, it's the chemicals that we have on our crops here in America that are causing the problem. What could that do? Well, think about our gut microbiome. Think about, our gut health is impacted by chemicals. If you're putting chemicals in our bodies that impact the health of your gut microbiome, that's going to affect everything from how your mood might be, how you digest your food. We mainly just would think about it like, what's happening with digestion and going to the bathroom, but our gut health affects us from head to toe. It affects our metabolism. It affects how we get the nutrients out of the food that we're eating. So
I was just going to ask you about that, Jen, because you talk about the gut microbiome in your book a lot, and obviously this all does have a consequence. So what kinds of foods or what do you do to improve your gut health so that it benefits you health-wise?
Well, avoiding the chemicals that are going to damage your gut microbiome is really important. And again, certain things like artificial sweeteners. We've been sold the idea, again, calories in, calories out, that's all that matters. And if that is how we work, if our bodies only work as calorie calculators, then diet sodas would have zero consequences. You just drink them as much as you want, no problem. But that's not actually what happens. Not only do they have metabolic consequences because you're having what's known as the cephalic phase insulin response, because you taste the sweetness from the diet soda and your brain is expecting calories to come in from the sweetness. So we have an insulin response, which can lead to insulin resistance, metabolic problems down the line with that. But these sweeteners also have an impact on our gut microbiome and affect our gut health. And these things are, these things are coming out now. Like researchers who thought that wasn't true are like, it is true, right? So these are not benign or, have zero effect on the body. And, you can look around and see that drinking all these diet sodas has not, in fact, made us healthier.
Absolutely. And do you think we need to be like more plant-based?
Well, here's the thing. A gut microbiome that is healthy, a healthy gut runs really well on lots and lots of fiber from plant foods. Now, if you have an unhealthy gut, then you've got to rebuild it. And that can take some time. There are people whose gut is in such a bad state that if they eat any fiber, they have like bloating and problems. And there's a great book about that for anyone who really wants to focus on rebuilding their gut health, and it's Fiber Fueled. Dr. Will Bulshwitz, he is a great guy. I've actually met him in person. We were both in New York last year for filming of the Zoe podcast. He's one of their scientific advisors. He's a gastroenterologist, and he lives just down the road from me in Charleston, and he and I've talked on the phone a few times. He is just a great guy, and he is completely plant-based, 100%. He's a vegan. He did not start out that way. Interestingly, he had the standard American diet, was a gastroenterologist, went to med school, started helping people with their gut issues, started learning more about the gut microbiome, fiber, the importance of fiber. And he tells the story early in the book of a woman that came to him, one of his patients who had gut problems. And so she had started eliminating more and more things. So she ended up being like on a very restrictive diet. Like now she's only eating like meat because anything else she has symptoms from. And so he's like, yeah, you've got a gut microbiome that can't tolerate things because you've removed all those things, and you've got to build back up. So there's a process, and I'm not a gut expert. I'm very aware of the importance of the gut, but eating probiotic foods, prebiotic foods, real ones. I'm not telling you go out and get your probiotic pills and start taking them, although there may be a place for that. There may be certain ones that are helpful, but I mean, eating fermented food, sauerkraut, kefir, or kefir, however you might say it. It's actually kefir. I think I looked at how to say it on YouTube. Most people say it wrong, but things like that. Real high quality, good yogurts that have the different bacteria, and they're cultured pickles. I mean, there's so many delicious things we can eat, and just it's a matter of variety. Tim Spector, who he wrote the foreword for Cleanish. I met him in person also finally when I was in New York for the Zoe podcast. He is great. He is one of my favorite scientific researchers, and he really stresses the importance of eating a wide variety of plant foods. Like he says, try to eat 30 different plant foods a week. Just try to eat 30 different plant foods a week, and you're going to feed your gut microbiome, and it's going to be diverse, and it will be healthier. So do I think you need to be completely plant-based? No. Tim Spector is not completely plant-based. He eats meat, he eats dairy, but he focuses on a lot of plants and high-quality foods, and feeding your gut microbiome with a lot of diversity from day to day, week to week. And I think that's really important. And it's really a lot of fun to try to see how many different things. A lot of us get into a rut.
And I think it can be like a little bit overwhelming in the beginning. I do have Fiber Fueled, and I did read through it, and I was starting to become a little bit like overwhelmed by it all. And I decided to just
add.
Right. I just made a chart. Well, I looked through the book. I made a list of prebiotics, probiotics, foods with fiber, things like that. And I just made categories of kind of my favorite foods in each area. And I just refer to it when I'm making my shopping list, because we all need inspiration anyway, right? So you can just kind of look at what's hanging on the fridge, make your shopping list based on those foods. It's really not that hard to, incorporate it.
It's and really, I want to emphasize, can I emphasize one thing real quick? And that is if you've been eating the standard American diet and now you're like, I am going to now be fiber fueled, your gut is going to be like,
So what are the effects? Diarrhea, vomiting?
Well, it might be. I mean, I don't know that you would vomit, but you're definitely
TMI. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know that you would vomit, but it's gonna imagine it's working. Like vomit is when it's like gets to here and it comes back out. Like if you ate something bad, right? But it's gonna work its way down through your small intestines. It's gonna get into your large. Now, assuming you don't have small intestine bacterial overgrowth, it's going to get down into your large intestine as your body's processing it. And you're not going to have the gut bacteria to process that, because if you've been eating the standard American diet of fast food and chips and whatever else it might be, your gut is used to that. And so I would start small. Like here's an example of that. I don't like cauliflower. I don't like it. It's not good to me. I
I
don't eat it.
love cauliflower.
My gut doesn't know what to do with cauliflower,
Ah,
right? So
interesting.
I can eat beans and vegetables and whole grains and just all the things that I normally eat. I got no problems. Well, I was at a conference and the main dish, I could either have salmon or I could have a cauliflower main dish. That was it. And I really don't like fish. That's just me. I don't like fish. But I was like, well, I guess I'll eat the roasted cauliflower. So I ate the roasted cauliflower. The next day, I had some really, really terrible gas.
Oh no.
When it got to that portion of my gut bacteria were like, what in the world is this?
Yeah.
And so, because they're down there creating
It's
things.
so interesting, and one of the chapters in my book that I have been writing for several years now is called Culinary Displacement Syndrome. And I don't know if I talked about this with you, Alison, before, but I wrote a whole chapter about what it's like to be a Canadian growing up with Dutch parents,
Oh,
where you are basically growing up, I was eating basically the Dutch culinary experience in Canada.
yeah.
And so at the age of 5, I was eating kale because Dutch people love and eat a lot of vegetables like kale and cauliflower and beans and all sorts of vegetables. And the interesting thing I wanted to mention was that when a Dutch person or a North American person, here's an example. When a North American person says, "What are you having tonight for dinner?" And most of the time they mention the meat. Oh, tonight we're having pork chops. Tonight we're having
Yeah.
burgers. Tonight we're having steak. Tonight we're having chicken. Tonight we're having pork. In Holland, the Dutch people say, "What are you having tonight for dinner?" "Oh, tonight we're having beans. Tonight we're having cauliflower. Tonight we're having kale." And I don't know if this started after the war. During the war, there was very little meat available.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And because of that, also, meat is very, very expensive in the Netherlands. I think in many European countries, but in Holland, meat is very expensive. So when you eat meat, like steak, your steak is literally this big.
Uh-huh.
That's it. That's how big your piece of meat is. As big as my eyeglasses here. Not like North American that. And the interesting thing about Alison and I having had both bariatric surgery, and I wanted to go back a little bit about gut health and trying different vegetables out and things like that. A lot of us have had major rewiring that have happened down in our guts, in our stomach, if you had VSG surgery or you've had bypass surgery. And so we're having to be very careful about what type of changes in our diet happen, because we get like really big issues with whatever changes are made in our food. And then the next thing I wanted to mention, and then I'll leave it up to you guys to talk about it, was that here in Canada, our grocery store, it's called Loblaws, has recently introduced 1,000 new international products in their stores, including the weirdest vegetables I've ever seen that are mostly Chinese based.
Okay.
So, because we have a huge Asian population here in Toronto, which has now reached over 10 million people.
Wow.
And that we have, like in the area where I live in downtown Toronto, I would say it's 80% Asian people. So that's why this particular grocery store has such a huge Chinese vegetable section of vegetables I have never even seen or heard of, and I would have no idea how to prepare them. I do like Chinese food, and I do like pho, or pho is the proper pronunciation. Not pho, but pho.
Pho.
These bowls with all these vegetables in it, and all of these Chinese vegetables that you've never ever had before. I mean, if you want to experiment with new vegetables, maybe go to a South Korean restaurant, or go to a Vietnamese restaurant, or don't go Chinese restaurant and get chicken balls, because that's not Chinese, really. It's just what we love, the chicken balls and fried rice, right? But it's so interesting because, again, going back to my original opening there, talk about culinary displacement syndrome, that we are introducing all of these international foods that are not hereditary or part of our indigenous culture.
Yeah.
Me being Dutch, and that I grew up with, you know, vegetables in our diet, but then later all of this processed food came in as we were getting, you know, into our tweens and older. That we go to school and you go to the cafeteria, and you go on Fridays was French fry day in the cafeteria that was covered in gravy and cheese curds.
Yeah, on Fridays we had pizza. It was pizza day.
Poutine, as we call
had
it here in
pizza.
Canada,
Uh-huh.
and creamsicles, you know, and Joe Louis and all of, I don't know if these are available in America, but the chemical food connection together with the Dutch culinary, together with, you know, living in a very cold climate where you're living a very sedentary life.
Mm-hmm.
In Holland, for example, what's very, very popular are French fries with mayonnaise. It's called Met. It's French fries and mayonnaise, and also in Belgium. But as you know, there are, for the city of Amsterdam, there are 1 million people and there are 2 million bikes. So it's a very moving society. People are always on their bikes, and they don't have to worry about biking through snow because of the environment. It doesn't really snow in Amsterdam ever. So I just wanted to talk, if you could talk a little bit more about the introduction and trying out some different things to help your gut health and like that.
Well, you know, just like you said, there are a lot of things that you're not familiar with in the grocery store. Just wander around and say, okay, have fun with it. You know, if you've got kids at home, your mine are grown up, but you know, if I had them back home now as young children and I could do over some of that, I would go through the produce section with my kids and say, ooh, let's try one new thing this week that we haven't tried before. What do you want to try?
That's a
And
good
let
idea.
the kids pick it out. And then, you know, maybe it's something you don't know what to do with. And that's, you know, thank goodness for the internet now. We have access to ideas from all around the world and say, okay, how is this traditionally prepared? Do we want to do it that way? Or, oh, how could we incorporate it into a dish that is more familiar to us, right? And just see what you can do with that and try something new. And don't be surprised if your gut's like, this is weird. Here's some gas for you. As you change your gut microbiome, you can tolerate more. I do not get gas from beans. I can eat beans every day. I'm just fine. Cauliflower, my gut didn't know what to do with it. So it's just a matter of trying different things. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about meat. You know, I'm not anti-meat. I don't eat a ton of meat. I have realized I love dairy. I love eggs,
Cheese.
I love all dairy, every kind of dairy. Yeah, fresh, high quality mozzarella. Like I would rather have that than ice cream. It's so good, big old hunk of mozzarella burrata. I could eat that with a
I
spoon.
do like my ice cream.
So good, but meat, I could take it or leave it. Sometimes I'm like craving it, but most of the time, you know, I don't have a ton of meat. It's just not something that I enjoy. I eat a lot of beans and things like that, chickpeas, but when we think about, you mentioned when you were growing up, you had like a small amount of meat. And, you know, I know y'all have read Cleanish, and in there I talk about the blue zones, but everybody listening's probably heard of the blue zones. And
Yeah, talk a little bit about the blue zones. Yeah.
I first heard about the blue zones when I was writing a book in 2017, after I'd written my first book, The Lay Don't Deny. And, you know, we were in the Facebook support groups and we were having the diet wars. Those were the diet wars years when like people were all like in 2017, it was like the keto movement was really taking root. And they also, you know, because when you're fasting, you get into ketosis from the fast, even if you eat carbs in your eating window. That's a whole different discussion. But the keto movement then, you know, really started fasting. So it was like people were eating keto and they were fasting and they were coming into the fasting support groups and also telling us all we should also be eating keto. Everyone should be eating keto. Keto is the way everyone should eat. And so I'm like, you know, I'd already tried keto. I didn't feel good eating that way. I didn't really know why. I'm like, surely there has to be a best way for everybody to eat. So I started really digging in. And that my book, Feast Without Fear, came out of that. And so I went in several different directions. And I mean, it was 2017, which was a long time ago. And gut research was really still kind of new. Like they were just within 10 years having been able to, look at your gut microbiome and see all the different varieties of bacteria that lived there and the different characteristics. Like they could finally sequence what was in your gut microbiome, whereas before they're like, well, that's all poop and bacteria. We don't know what it is. No big deal. Now they're like starting, and they're really digging in, figuring out what's in there. And so I started really getting into the gut health and the importance of plants and all of that. But then parallel to that, I was reading about the blue zones. And, I'm researching to write this book. It was summer vacation. I'm a teacher. I was on summer break. So I was like fully immersed in the concepts. And I realized that what they were eating in the blue zones, which, backtrack a little bit about that. What are the blue zones? The blue zones are areas in the world where they tend to have more centenarians or people living to long age, like Okinawa, Japan, Icaria in Greece, Sardinia in Italy. There's one in South America, I think, can't think of. There's an area in California with the
So
Seventh Day
people that are
Adventists.
living beyond 100 years old.
They have more centenarians. Why?
Yeah.
Why is that? And so Dan Buettner has done a lot of work on that, but he worked for National Geographic and they started digging in and they're like, well, it's the way that they're eating. And so you start looking at the profile of how they eat in the blue zones. Now, every single blue zone eats differently, right? They're going to eat differently in Japan than they eat in South America or Greece or Italy. They're eating, like in Japan, they were eating a whole lot of this certain kind of sweet potato that grew there. They were eating a lot of those sweet potatoes. Obviously, they weren't eating that exact same sweet potato in Italy. They were eating something different, but they were eating what was around them, what grew, what was seasonal. But they had certain things in common. Very heavy in plants, whatever grew around them, very heavy in plants. And
Right.
also, none of them were vegetarian or vegan or avoided dairy or counted macros or counted calories. If you went to somebody who was 90 years old in one of these communities and said, tell me how many calories you eat, they'd be like, that's nonsense. What are you talking about? Or what are
Yeah.
your macros? They'd be like, what are you talking about? They
Right.
just ate the traditional food. But all of those blue zones, meat was more of like a condiment. They were heavy into seafood. They ate a lot of plants, starchy plants, all the plants. They were not like, can't have any carbs, carbs are bad, but they also weren't eating, like ultra processed foods. And so, as I said, I'm putting all this, I'm heavy into the research, the gut, what we know about the gut, what we know about the blue zones. And I realized that the foods they're eating in the blue zones are the foods that also give you a healthy gut microbiome. So I made that connection and I talk about it in Feast Without Fear. And I also went down the path of the Mediterranean diet, which is a very well-researched and healthy diet, and the foods that you eat in the Mediterranean region. Guess what? It's the same foods that feed your gut well and that they eat in the blue zones. So when we just eat real foods, lots of plants. Michael Pollan said it in his work when he's a journalist and he went out to research food because food is complicated. He wrote several good books about that, but he came up with the 3 food rules. Eat food. Now by that, real food. We're talking about real food. Doritos are not food. I'm sorry. They're not food. Doritos are entertainment for your mouth that have some food products.
That's great. Entertainment for your mouth. I love that.
If you go down on the
reuse
ingredients,
that many times.
Okay. It started with corn, but that's not like corn, right? There might be some food in it, but it's not food anymore. It's no longer food. So eat food. Not too much. Overeating, we don't want to overeat. And if you look, I remember when I was writing Feast Without Fear, digging into, there's like records of how much food people eat in the blue zones. Like there's this data where like how many calories they tended to eat. In America, we're eating more calories.
Yeah.
We're eating a lot more. And of course, I talked about that before with Kevin Hall's research about how when you're eating ultra processed food, you have the drive to eat more and you tend to overeat. So you don't want to eat too much. But the third food rule is eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
Yeah.
So it all
Now,
comes down to that.
yeah. Now I have a burning question.
All
It's
right.
very hard for me not to interrupt anybody, being a Leo, because I always want to be in control. The My best friend Bryn
Mhm.
is a wonderful, wonderful person who is a death doula and a practice a technician in helping people with Alzheimer and dementia.
Yep.
Music is medicine. Now, my burning question is regarding the research done for people that are centenarians in the blue zones around the world. How is it that all of these whole foods gut health are affecting things like dementia? So do you know, like
I don't
offhand?
know. That's a very interesting question. I don't know the answer to it. I would have a hunch
Yeah, me
that they would
too.
probably
Be
have better
less.
outcomes.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like if you nourish your body well, eat real food, you're going to have a better outcome. Now we are now calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. So it's
Yeah,
really
I heard that
related to
recently.
metabolic,
Yeah.
yep, metabolic. It's just another way that it manifests itself. If you've got, insulin resistance, there's a book Dr. Benjamin Bickman wrote called Why We Get Sick, and he's a researcher himself, and he understands insulin resistance. He traces so many, if not like literally all of the modern problems that we're having, from having trouble going through menopause with your hormones to dementia to cancer to heart disease, you name it, can be related to hyperinsulinemia, which is having too much insulin. And so ultra processed foods stimulate your body to release more insulin. We talked before about, diet sodas, all the junk foods that we're having all the time. But also intermittent fasting helps with that. Intermittent
Yes.
fasting keeps your insulin low. So if we're eating real foods in an eating window, then that's going to be really helpful. Funnily enough, some of these blue zones have religions that have periods of fasting in there too. Like I interviewed a emergency room doctor, first episode of Intermittent Fasting Stories that came out in January of 2025. He's an emergency room doctor, but he's Greek Orthodox. That's his religion. And he talks about how the religion of being Greek Orthodox has fasting throughout it as part of their religion. In fact, every major religion has fasting as a tenet of the religion. And he talked about some monks that lived in Greece that were Greek Orthodox that lived so very much longer, and that the fasting is an important part of that. So I really think that intermittent fasting, real foods, cutting down the chemical input from, how you how you wash your clothes in. Like, these clothes are touching me all day long. And if I wash them in a detergent that is releasing a scent all day long and it's going in through my skin, we all know chemicals go in through our skin. Like, I'm wearing an estrogen patch right now. I'm on hormone replacement therapy because I'm postmenopausal. We know that the estrogen gets into my body through this patch transdermally. So chemicals do that too. You put on lotion, that stuff gets absorbed into your skin and can go all throughout your body. And so it's just a matter of pulling it all together. Eat mostly clean, live mainly clean, and unlock your body's natural ability to self-clean. And I really think that it's going to have downstream effects where, Alzheimer's, we're complex organisms, right? And we have a lot of input coming into us at all times. So it's impossible to untangle everything, but we want to set ourselves up for the best possible outcome. I can go to the airport and they're spraying me in the face with, air freshener in the bathroom. I can't avoid that, but I can avoid what I do at home. And so the whole point of the ish in Cleanish is there's no such thing as perfection, but you do what you can.
Yeah, that's what I was going to talk to you about next.
I just wanted to mention one thing, Alison. I just want to jump in, then you go for it, because I have one thing on my mind that I wanted to say when you were talking about this, Jen, about the blue zone and about intermittent fasting and about whole foods, cleanish foods, cleanish things. So the three of us are going to continue with podcasts well into our centenarian years, right? Because the three of us, well, I'm older though, hopefully will be the example 40, 50 years from now
Yeah.
to say that, okay, look at us. A lot of people are kicking and screaming with having to take on change. People don't like change. Alison and I were forced to change our diets because of our physical bariatric surgery. We were forced to do it. We had to eat less because our stomach won't let us eat more. But when you are saying, okay, all of these things, all of the research that's out there about the blue zone, about whole foods, about this is much healthier if you want to live a longer life, a healthier, longer life. And of course, don't forget the exercise component as well. That I think I'm the kind of person that is like, okay, I am going to be the guinea pig. I am going to be the example. I'm going to talk about myself because I am actually doing this, as opposed to a medical person who can talk about it because he did the research but doesn't practice it. I'm a practitioner, and I'm practicing intermittent fasting. I have practiced bariatric surgery, and we have all practiced every diet on the earth. So I just wanted to mention that quickly, that the three of us are going to be doing a podcast well into our 120th year, because
If people are still doing podcasts, we'll see. It'll be something different. Who
Might
knows?
be.
But 10 years ago, did we even know that we were going to podcasts were going to exist?
No, because I was a blogger 20 years ago.
I skipped the blogging step. But.
Oh, I did the blogging thing. But the thing is that is so interesting about this, because it's all so new, and because we have an epidemic of obesity in North America, but we also now have an epidemic of type 3 diabetes with dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and both of my grandmothers had dementia when they died. Both of my grandmothers did. And so it's a really big part of my why. Okay,
so I just wanted to mention that. So Alison, off you go with your question.
So we'll mark our calendars in 50 years. We'll revisit the centenarian podcast. But I wanted to just talk a little bit about, we talked about how your book was very comprehensive. It has lots of research. The paralysis of analysis chapter. How do we avoid being obsessed and fearful about this, kind of like adopting this lifestyle?
When the book first came out, we had a book study in the community, and people were like so excited to get started. And then as we went through it, they're like, oh my God, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Again, ignorance is bliss, right? So before I understood all this, cooking on my Teflon pan, using my chemical whatever. I had those little things, those Bath and Body Works plugins that you plug in that would release the scent. I had them in my classroom in the 90s. I would plug those in because it smelled so good. I'm like, how many of the children were then having like behavior problems because their bodies were reacting to the chemicals that they were breathing in my classroom? I'm like, sorry, children, I didn't know. But once we know better, we do better, right? Maya Angelou said that, and she's right. And the thing is that, like as you get to the end of each chapter, and then you get to the back where it's time to apply what you've learned, I want you to choose what's most important to you first and what feels most manageable. You can't change everything at once. You can't throw away everything in your pantry, everything in your cupboards, everything in your bathroom and start over. You might be tempted to do it, but you really just can't. But so start with the things that are most important to you. As I mentioned in Cleanish, deodorant was one of the things that I couldn't find a natural deodorant that worked for me. And so I continued to use a regular deodorant for a long, long time till finally I did find a deodorant that is a natural deodorant that's rated really high that does work for me now. And so if I live in the southern United States where it gets real hot and I'm able to switch to natural deodorant, hooray. One thing I haven't changed is my mayonnaise. I'm sure I would like the mayonnaise in Europe.
But you can make your own mayonnaise really quickly.
I've tried it. I'm not good at it, and I don't want to fool with it. I don't want to make my own mayonnaise. Okay.
All right.
She's drawing the line.
I'm clean.
It's really easy, actually. Well, but anyway,
I've tried it before and I was not successful. I don't know why, but I'm clean-ish. I really like this certain kind of mayonnaise. It's called Duke's mayonnaise. It's a Southern tradition. I like the taste of it. It's made with soybean oil, it's a seed oil, probably GMO. But you know what? I don't eat a lot of mayonnaise. I don't eat it often. So when I eat it, I'm going to eat Duke's mayonnaise and I'm not sorry because I'm clean-ish. And, I have organic butter that I use most of the time. I have organic um, olive oil that I use most of the time. I buy organic bread. I am setting myself up with really good choices. So I can eat my regular mayonnaise if I want to have mayonnaise and it's not like ruining my health. Right.
Yeah, and you say in your book, like this one section in that particular chapter, you say carbs are not bad, fat is
They're
not
not
bad,
bad.
protein
No.
is not bad, meat is not bad, vegetables is not bad, fruit is not bad, potatoes are not bad, grains are not bad, even Doritos. And I'm an obsessive person. I have a
Hmm.
tendency of being obsessive, but you know the old joke, how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
Yes. Is it like practice, practice, practice? Is
Practice,
that the answer?
practice.
Yeah.
So I would say the better word for obsession is practice.
Hmm.
I'm practicing intermittent fasting till I get really good at it. I'm practicing eating whole foods
Yep.
until it becomes a part of my life. If I think in musician terms, for those who are listeners who don't know, I'm a retired professional musician and worked and played with many orchestras in Europe and in Canada. And when I started playing the French horn when I was 12 years old, I sucked, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
got better because I practiced.
Right.
But I was obsessed with playing the horn and being a musician, and I was determined to become a fantastic, successful musician and get a job in an orchestra. Same thing with my diet or my body
Hmm.
journey, that I practiced every diet, didn't, it was not successful because something got in the way.
Yeah.
And that practicing intermittent fasting is the most efficient lifestyle I have ever experienced in all my professional dieting life.
Hmm.
And believe me, you and I and Alison, we've all done every
Oh, we
single
have.
freaking diet.
Yep.
And this famous saying that people say to you, oh, you just don't have the willpower. This
No,
stuff,
we've tried so hard. We've done crazy things. People who are professional dieters like us that have struggled with our weight. I lost 80 pounds for people who might just don't know me and are watching this for the first time. I lost 80 pounds. I did not have bariatric surgery. I did not use, diet injections to lose these 80 pounds, but I lost the 80 pounds 2014 to 2015, and I've kept it off ever since because I found what worked for me, intermittent fasting.
yeah,
Prior to that, I tried everything and I had great willpower and could stick to it. But your body works against you. You can only restrict your calories for so long before your body fights back. Anybody who doesn't understand that, try holding your breath as long as you can. Eventually, you will be forced to gasp for air. The same thing is true if you over restrict and eat a tiny amount of calories. Eventually, your body fights back because it's like this is not good for you. You're hurting yourself. Eat more food, right? So we can't work against our body. We have to work
yeah.
with our body. And intermittent fasting is actually working with your body in a new way. That all those restrictive diets and crazy things that we did, they're working against your body, and that's why your body fights back. You
Yeah,
can't help it. Your body is
no.
very powerful.
Well, and as we wrap up, and I'm just looking at a quote part of your book here that you wrote, bad is a moral judgment. If we eat
Hmm.
bad foods, we must be bad people. Cue
Yep.
the guilt.
Yep.
And choosing to eat in an overall healthy manner is not about developing strict rules or living a life of deprivation. It's about making choices to support health that fuels our bodies and promotes a natural balance and has a balance of what we wear and a balance of what we smell and everything like that. So, Jen, as we wrap up, and again, thank you so very much for coming here today. And I hope that we can do another podcast together and we can I think we're reaching out to a huge amount of people now with this particular topic in your book,
Yeah.
Cleanish. And by the way, every single book or person you talked about in this podcast, I will be adding the links to our at the bottom in the description to all of these books that you talked about and all these fabulous friends and mentors. And you're a mentor for us, and I'll be your music mentor. But it's just, what advice would you give to someone just starting their Cleanish journey?
And again, it always goes back to, first of all, don't let it overwhelm you. Don't bury your head in the sand like you're an ostrich, because again, knowledge is power. And then you can start to make the changes that are most important to you and take it at your own speed. And perfection is not required. I'm sure there's somebody out there who'd be like, oh my God, Jen eats Duke's mayonnaise. She's a fake. No, I'm a real person. And I want to live a life that I enjoy. And I want to choose the things that I can do easily. I can
Yeah.
very easily buy organic butter. Super easy to do that. I can buy organic produce a lot of the time. Now, let's imagine someone can't afford organic produce. Buying regular produce is way better than saying, well, I can't afford organic produce. I guess I'm just not going to eat any vegetables. No, we take the steps that we can take. Everyone start where you are and do a little bit better in areas that are the easiest for you to do better.
Yeah.
And take the small steps until that becomes second nature. It's really easy for me to buy clean makeup and buy clean cleaning products and choose the organic where I can. Sometimes, like, I might need some cheese and there isn't an organic version of that cheese, so I buy the regular cheese, right? It's okay. It's doing the best you can and not feeling like everything has to be perfect, because it won't be perfect. You can't
That's
be
right.
perfect.
Yeah.
You make
And
the changes you can make and they add up.
I think
And
that's
what,
very, very helpful.
yeah, very, very helpful. And again, another mentor of yours in the research that you did, Dr. Bratman, he talks about orthorexia.
Yeah.
And that orthorexia is a brand new word for me. And that just to quickly sort of give a summary of what orthorexia is.
Well, orthorexia, unless it's been recently identified, because it had not as of when I wrote Cleanish, orthorexia is a new term. Basically, it's when you have like perfectionism surrounding your eating, right? And it's an eating disorder, a proposed eating disorder, but I think we all understand it. Like, I think it should be recognized. We've all heard of anorexia, right? And we've heard of bulimia. Those are eating disorders we understand. But orthorexia is when you become so paralyzed by your food choices that you have to have rules. And like, someone with orthorexia would not be able to eat Duke's mayonnaise, right? That would not fit into their food. That would be like, no, that is not clean. That is not good. So you can start to become disordered about what you will and won't do. And we don't want to get into that kind of,
No.
of thinking where you're afraid, fearing. You want to do the best that you can. But we probably, have seen maybe influencers out there who might, you can tell, have an unhealthy relationship with the idea of food perfection, and like literally being afraid to venture out, like, I can't eat this because of whatever the food rules are. And Dr. Bratman's story was really interesting, and I paraphrased it in Cleanish, but in his book about orthorexia, where he talks about his own personal journey with it and how it comes full circle with the food choices that he was making, and depending on who you ask and who you talk to and what you read, you can convince yourself that like anything is the right way to do it. I could send you, to certain books that made you think that like you should only eat meat. I could also send you to books that convince you should never eat meat. And reality is that, somewhere in between, right? Being healthy with our food choices and variety, and not being overly perfectionistic. Now, if someone has a shellfish allergy, they should never eat shellfish.
No.
And that's not the same thing. If you have celiac disease, you cannot eat gluten, right? So that's different, because that is like, you've got a health condition, you must eat a certain way. That would not be orthorexia. But if I suddenly decided, like, gluten is not clean and I'm just going to avoid it it doesn't cause me any problems, but I'm not going to eat it and I'm going to be obsessive about that. And I don't have any problems from it, but I'm still not going to have it because I think it's bad. That's when you start getting into orthorexia. And it starts like you can't eat at other people's homes, or you can't go to a restaurant, or you can't travel, or you have to bring all of your food with you. And again, if you have a life-threatening allergy, like a peanut allergy or a child with a peanut allergy, that type of hypervigilance is important.
And that's a whole other conversation that we can have on another podcast about peanut allergies, because I grew up eating peanut butter and jam sandwiches, as everybody in the 60s and 70s did. But why is there a peanut allergy now?
I could talk about that. I could theorize about that all day.
Yeah, I know. And that's the interesting thing about this fantastic conversation that we've had together, Jen and Alison. It's just my mind is blowing, but at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, my window is open now, and I actually would love to have some lunch, but this is also so interesting because how much is this going to influence what I'm going to have for lunch?
Awesome.
But it's again what you said. We're all human, right? There's no, you need to only eat these things, or you should only eat those things, or why are you eating those things? It's just, we're all trying to just row the boats with the oars that we have around us. And, living again in a very cold climate, I must admit, I eat way less food when I'm in a warm climate. Summertime in Canada, I hardly eat very much food. In Canada, in the winter, I eat way more food. So there's again an extreme example. I'm watching I just got to say this quickly. I'm watching a documentary series right now because I don't want to know anything about politics on TV. So I'm watching a documentary series about the Aboriginal people of Alaska and what their diet consists of. And their diet consists of mainly meat. And
it's what they have around them. But
it's what they eat, what's around them. And
it's
very,
seasonal.
very interesting thing
they eat differently in the summer. When there's more plants available, they eat the plants when they're available. But if there aren't any plants available, they eat what's around. That's what's so fascinating when you start studying people around the world that were healthy with their indigenous diets. You can go to, the tropical islands, and they're pretty much eating mostly plants, and they're healthy. It's just a matter of what's around you.
Because one of the indigenous peoples were talking about how they were eating many more brought in foods that were more expensive, and then they were becoming sick, and they had to go back to eating their original beaver and seal and whale.
The ultra processed foods, because when you go to indigenous populations around the world eating the diet that was available to them in that climate, in that region, it's real food.
Yeah.
Eat real food.
Eat real food. So that's the message today, everybody. Eat real food. Whole food, whatever. I actually don't like the word whole food. I don't like the word. I don't think it's appropriate. I think real food is a better word.
I think real food is better.
Real food is better. So thank you again. Thank you again, Alison and Jen. It's been an incredible pleasure. And for our listeners, make sure you go and pick up her book.
Very inspiring. Yes. Thank you for writing it.
It's not just for people that are intermittent fasting. It's for everybody. And that's so interesting about this podcast episode today, that it affects everybody, not just people that are intermittent fasting. And that's why I found it so interesting that you wrote this book that really touches on a subject, especially for North Americans who are struggling with the amount of processed food that is sneakily added to every single product you buy on the inside aisles of your grocery store. And that, so any last thoughts, Alison?
I don't think so, but we would love to know where else we can find you, Jen. You mentioned jenstevens.com.
Right. Jen is Gin, like gin and tonic, Stevens with a PH. Go to jenstevens.com. There's links to everything there. I have an intermittent fasting community that people can join. It is not free. It's off of Facebook, but it's very affordable. But we have people that will support you through intermittent fasting. But, don't be afraid to start where you are. Every little bit makes a difference. Just changing your laundry detergent, one thing. Try one thing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again so much. And I had a great time, and it was a really, really great episode to talk about these really important things because, like culinary displacement syndrome, which is my own made up words, that it's we all in North America come from somewhere else, and we're not eating our indigenous foods. We're not. People in Alaska are, but we're not.
Think, here I am. I am from the British Isles. All my roots. I have my family tree, and I've been doing a lot of genealogical research with that, which is fascinating. But the British Isles, no wonder I like the potatoes and the dairy.
Yeah. Well, I lived in Amsterdam for 20 years, and I was the only obese person there.
Oh.
Basically, I was like a circus act because even though they're it's the North American food, and it's you don't see as many obesity issues in China, you don't see obesity issues in Europe, but you do see it here in North America.
Yeah.
So again, thank you so much. Get the book, everybody, and check out her website, jenstevens.com, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Take care.